What's going on, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of JaAR. JaAR, for those of you that may be new, stands for Joe
and Amy
Review. This is our weekly show where we review the Magic stories. And having finished the Innistrad Midnight Hunt stories last week, we are now here, continuing right along. We are here with the first Innistrad Crimson Vow story, with main story episode 1, Tithes and Invitations, by K. Arsenault Rivera. So first of all, continuing with the same author from Midnight Hunt for the main stories, which is great. My quick review at the top is, I thought this one was fine. I think there was a portion in the middle there where I felt like it dipped ever so slightly, but I think it picked itself back up, and I think the beginning was also fantastic. So I enjoyed the beginning, I enjoyed the end, and so even with that little dip in the middle, I still think it leans very heavily towards being very good.
Okay. I would say probably that I feel like the writing isn't as good as Midnight Hunt stories were.
Okay.
Which, yeah, I think I was a little disappointed because it was the same author, and so I was expecting a little bit more consistency. But I think that might be like from a characterization standpoint. Like I think the characterization was a little lacking. Okay. Or like a little off from what I expected to see from those characters.
Okay. And we'll get into that, I'm sure, in the full review itself. But first, I guess we should say, if you have not gotten a chance to read this story for yourself yet, and after those quick reviews, if that is something that you want to do, the top link in the description down below will take you right to this story. We want to remove as many barriers as possible, so please feel free to go check that story out for yourself if that is something that interests you. And then, of course, we would love it if you would come back here and join us for the continuation of this review. And last but not least, before we jump into the review itself, hi, welcome to the channel. Thank you so much for being here. Please don't forget to subscribe and ring that bell so that you will get notifications whenever any of our videos come out. More of this series. We have openings coming out on Mondays for pre-release packs, etc., and going into the future. So if you want to see that, and then every Monday and Friday from 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern, right here on this channel, we do live streams. Mondays are MTG Arena, so if you're Magic fans, come join us for that. And then on Fridays, we do video games. So this video is coming out on Thursday. If you are here the day it comes out, then tomorrow, Friday, 8 to 10 p.m., we will be playing or continuing our playthrough of X-Men Legends for the PlayStation 2. So if that's something that interests you, we would love to have you. Come in, say hello in chat, and it should be an amazing time. So thank you for listening to that. And now, on to the full review itself. The start of this story, where I said I liked the beginning, it talks about vampires in general, which makes sense. It's Crimson Vow. And it talks about the vampires of Stensia. It talks about them napping, sleeping as a joke. Right. Which is, I think, more defined later when Soren mentions that, like, because it's eternal night, they don't need to sleep. Right. And like, so
it's another indulgence.
Yeah.
Like, oh, well, we have so much power. We're so untouchable right now that we can just, go sleep in our coffins, even though we don't have like a real reason to.
Well, and it's like, right, it's like, oh, look at us, we're humans, bleh, sleep time, like it really seemed like it was like something like that, which I thought was very funny. But it goes from that, where they're just like joking about sleeping, then there's the first picture in the story, and then it's immediately followed by the line, quote, "Grigori presses the knife to his mother's wrist."
Which seems out of nowhere.
I was just like, holy crap, man, what? Which is a good and a bad thing, right? It's good because there's such shock factor, but it's also like such whiplash. And again, I don't think it's a negative. I appreciated it because it's like something lighthearted and then, hey, by the way, don't forget everything's terrible. Right. I know we started with a joke, but we're still on Innistrad and it's still Eternal Night, so...
I know it's a beautiful wedding, but there are always people who are not invited.
Yeah.
And those people are sad.
Yeah, that's definitely what it is.
Yeah. 100%.
Then you asked me to write down some quotes, and these jump around a bit, but are quotes from the story. Refused to wake was describing the mother.
So we talked about the fact that he was slitting his mom's wrist, basically, so that she could bleed into this bowl.
Yep. To pay the tithe. Tithes
right.
and invitations, pay the tithe.
But she's asleep, so she can't, consent to doing that. Not that really anyone could, realistically, because they were all just being forced. But she's laying there, and what was it, after the massacre?
It was 2 days after the massacre that she fell asleep. And has been asleep that way for weeks, which means it's definitely not sleep. No, just throw that out there.
She's in a coma. But I thought it was interesting that they used the words "refused to wake" as if it was intentional, as if it was up to her, because she suffered this traumatic event, and her brain said, to protect you, I'm shutting down. The end.
Yeah.
And that's what happened.
Yeah. And then kind of going along those lines, talking about I guess it was, I'm trying to figure out, remind myself what this is referring to. I guess it was the mother. Before the gathering, or the massacre.
Yeah.
Before, so full of hope. After, something in her, now broken.
Yeah. So after this traumatic event, her brain breaks. But that's not really what it is, right? And
some people call it
shuts off.
Right. Some people call situations like this, not this exact thing, but a mental break, right? So it's that.
Yes, but that's not the correct way of saying
correct,
it.
Absolutely. Right.
It's offensive to say that because it's wrong. So the correct way to describe that is to say she suffered a traumatic event, and in order to protect herself from that, her brain is doing everything it can, which really just means it's doing nothing.
Yeah. It's trying to protect her by shutting her down for a little while. Yeah.
And that's what happens when you repress memories. It's the same sort of thing, right? Your brain takes that bit of information and sticks it somewhere else, and then throws some dirt on top. keep it in there. You don't want it coming out, and then it comes out eventually.
That's funny. I mean, it's not funny, but it's funny. I like that.
But that's what it does, as a defense mechanism.
Yeah. I know that you appreciated the fact that in the letters to the humans of, hey, fill these bowls. Not a question.
Right.
Not a request, a mandate. But I know you loved that she was already calling herself the unquestioned Lord of Innistrad.
The entire plane. Unquestioned Lord of it.
I mean,
First of all, she'd be a lady, not a lord. And then second of all, what the fuck? It's very much questioned.
Well, it's gonna be, because at the end of the story we hear that, the Gatewatch / Adeline / Sorin / Arlen are gonna be getting ready to crash the wedding, so it will be, questioned in that way, but... Yeah, but Sorin knows that if the marriage or the wedding goes through, then she would be the unquestioned Lord of Innistrad. Yeah. I mean, to be fair, as Sorin is concerned with...
She would just have so much power that no one would have the ability to question her.
But like Sorin was talking about, what would she be the Lord of at that point?
Yeah, right.
Because in a couple of months, all the humans are going to be dead.
Right.
So, or dead or turned into werewolf, vampire, geist... He didn't mention zombie, but gotta be zombie, unless they are just saying geists are also zombies, but those are the spirits, so... No. He didn't say zombie, even though we read that story.
He talked about the Stitchers a little bit, and like...
Only with the book. Only with that book. Oh. So, I mean, he knows they exist, obviously, but all he did was say, like, of course that book is bound in human vellum. Yeah. You know, I only have books from the best, so, of course. Gross. It's like, yes, congratulations, dude, we're so proud of you. I appreciated that at one point they mentioned the comparison between Kessig with their like, they feel like they're surrounded by werewolves at all times in the woods, whereas Stenzia knows that there are vampires, because they happily walk the streets, they being the vampires, happily are able to walk the streets. They give these decrees to the humans and demand bowls of blood and the like. So I thought that was...
I mean, it's not that they do that on every occasion.
No, but...
It's a special occasion thing.
Sure, but still, I'm saying that the vampires aren't hiding themselves.
Right, no.
The humans of Stenzia know the vampires exist, the castles are there, they go work in the castles. Mm-hmm. Whereas in Kessig, they're like, the werewolves are out there somewhere. Meanwhile, the humans are like, that's the vampire's castle, it's right there. They live in that one. You know, they're able to just, you know, like... and so I appreciated the comparing and contrasting, but also the fact that it was specifically Kessig, right? They didn't talk about, off the top of my head, I'm not going to... Thraben, right, is the one with all the zombies. He didn't mention Thraben. He specifically mentions Kessig. Why? Because we just had the werewolf set and all the werewolf stories, and now comparing it to what we're in for with this one and how vampires are different from werewolves, so strap in, be ready.
Well, and I thought it was interesting that they said all of this and made all of these distinctions of the different places that exist in Innistrad after saying that Olivia is the unquestioned leader of it all.
Yeah.
Which is so ridiculous. Anyway.
Yeah. And speaking of the...
Because there's not enough consistency from area to area.
Yeah.
To have any thought in your mind that it would all be run by the same person.
Well, like you said, she would have both of those massive vampire families under her control that she could have people in every area. Yeah. So Kessig could be ruled by the werewolves, but if you put enough vampires in there, the werewolves aren't gonna, you know, be able to lord over it for long. Mm. I mentioned the castles and people working in the castles, so you had me for another quote that I know you wanted to talk about. If you worked for them, they said, you were safe. But sometimes you die out there in the castles while you're on the job. And what's your family to do then?
Yeah, that portion I wanted you to write because it reminded me so much of the Industrial Revolution. And back, just like thinking about families just struggling to survive the tenements and the factories that they were working in, and they were told, okay, these jobs where you're working way too many hours and completely unsafe conditions are the ways that you will make enough money to get your family to an actual livable home as opposed to where you're currently living. And it was essentially a lie because the working conditions were so bad and the salaries weren't even actually good enough to get them out of the tenements. And there was such an overpopulation problem for those areas, and getting out of those areas was impossible. And I mean, it's really, I thought of the Industrial Revolution, but it's really just the same problem today, just as much. If you think about pretty much any metropolitan area, you're going to have neighborhoods where the living expenses are so high that they in no way actually meet up with the amount of money that people get paid to work in those areas.
Yeah.
in a way that makes it safe and good quality of life for these people. So
and
that's, you know, not even considering that there are vampires and werewolves and all these other things endangering your safety.
Well, and the story
on a consistent basis,
right? And the story talks about that as well. Grigori, when we're hearing the story from his perspective, he mentions that anyone who could have gotten out had already gotten out. So, like you said, the people who could afford, if that's the right word to use there, if the people who could afford to leave already left. Everybody else who stayed, they didn't do it because they're like, it's not that bad, right? They did it because they were like, we have nowhere to go,
right?
So we have to stay despite the conditions that we live in and the world or area that we live in and what we're subjected to.
Yeah, and I mentioned metropolitan areas, but it's really rural areas as well.
Mm-hmm.
Where you know, there might be one place to work, you know, and that's it. And everybody who lives in that area works at that one place that there is to work. And then you just pray that it doesn't go under, because then the whole town is just like, you know, out of luck.
Yeah. And unfortunately, that absolutely is a thing that happens.
Definitely had a lot of that too.
Yeah.
You know, and what you just said of like people not being able to move or anything like that because they just don't have the ability to do so. It actually reminded me of that movie Dark Waters that we saw.
Sure.
Where there was all this pollution in the water and it was giving everybody cancer. But these people kept living here because they didn't have the means to leave, and it was their home. And so they were trying to fight against these companies, you know, putting all this pollution in the water and killing them. And ultimately all that happened was they died.
Yeah. It reminds me of like disasters like Hurricane Katrina.
Oh, okay.
And people, there were some critics, I guess you could call them. I don't know that I'm happy using that word, but we'll go with it. Who were like, well, why don't they just leave? Yeah, sure, that's easy.
Yeah.
Just leave. I'm sure they hadn't thought of that.
Right.
And
I'm sure they hadn't thought of leaving when they were told that they needed to evacuate.
And that they could die and lose their homes, but it's literally all they had.
Right.
So of course they couldn't just leave. So yeah, that's what it reminded me. Same idea, but that's what I thought of.
Well, and a lot of people did just leave, and then they
came
back to ruin.
Yeah.
Okay, the only asset that I own in my life, the only thing that is worth anything that I have is now a pile of debris on the ground.
Yeah.
You know, and then to have such a terrible response in terms of either insurance or FEMA or whomever, you know, not replenish any of that really because they just couldn't anticipate how severe it was going to be.
Yeah.
That they didn't have, that even a government organization didn't have the means to make that happen for people. It's devastating.
Yeah. I don't have a good transition for this one, but then we get to the portion where the Gatewatch are mentioned again, and Adeline. It's from Adeline's perspective, and there's a hint. And look, I'll say I don't know how they should have done this, but neither you nor I believe, but correct me if I'm wrong, appreciated the way that it was done. There seems to be a hint, a very slight hint, dropped in the story of Adeline and Chandra being a thing, because Adeline mentions that there seems to be of all the places to sit while Arlen seems to be talking to everybody, there's a bench for two. It's the only place left, and Kaya is off to the side smirking, and the only two people that need seats are Adeline and Chandra. And it makes it seem like Kaya is like, you know, when a friend like tries to facilitate two people spending time together because either she knows something is knows that at least one of them wants something to happen, or she wants something to happen and so is kind of pushing them together. I don't know how I would have wanted them to go back to the Chandra thing. I mean, probably just giving us the Chandra-Nyssa relationship, but it seems like they're moving very far away from that. But the fact that this is the way that they did it feels like really thrown together and cheap, because we've not heard anything from Adeline's perspective in relation to Chandra, and we haven't heard from Chandra's perspective, period, for these particular stories on Innistrad. So, I don't know if you have an opinion on that, or if you want.
Oh, I do.
Go for it. I don't know if you want to share with us your opinion on that.
Yeah, I don't know if you want me to. It's very... it's extremely cheap, insulting of our intelligence, of our... of everything. It's very... It very much feels like they're saying they're not racist because they have black friends. It's like... It's like, we're not homophobic because we fixed it, see? See? We fixed it. You like this, right? You said you like this. You like this.
This is what
right?
you wanted. This is here. I got you this. This is what the man at the store said you would like.
Yeah, but a grandmother not knowing what to get her grandchild for a gift is different, because a grandmother has good intentions. A grandmother's unassuming. A grandmother asks the guy at the store because she hopes that the guy at the store knows better than she. Wizards didn't do that.
Yeah.
Wizards put in place someone who was a threat to the community. And then they attempted to smooth things over after the fact, too late after the fact, and not in a way that makes it seem like they actually mean it. In a way that makes it seem like they still have their middle fingers up at us. They still have their nose up at us. And they're simply doing what we said we wanted. And really what that means is that they read that the community is so mad about the whole Chandra thing that they were like, well, we'll just do it again. No. How about you actually fix it? Meaning, backtrack to the point where you left off and actually make that relationship solid, and state how stupid it was that you changed it in the first place. Or clean slate and you don't try to put Chandra in any kind of relationship. At that point, I feel like it should be, okay, Chandra's off limits now. Now you find somebody else that you put in a relationship to clean up the mess. Don't use Chandra for your stupid bullshit again, because it's just insulting.
It was
like this character doesn't deserve that.
It was, again, funny's not really the word. It was sad. I read it and I was the one who was like, oh, Do you see what they're doing?
Right.
Do you
and
see what they're getting out there?
It didn't occur to me that they were really gonna try this bullshit again.
And it even before I saw the look on your face, which kind of mirrored what I was feeling, I felt exhausted. I was like, oh, that's what they're doing. Oh, good. You know, it was like, hooray, this is happening.
Right.
So
it's infuriating.
Yeah.
It's like, just let this character be this character. The end. You don't get to fuck around with this character's relationships anymore. Just stop.
Yeah.
Just fucking stop. Because we don't care. If you want to foster another any other relationship that you either had in the past fostered or are creating now, then fine. But you shouldn't be doing it with Nyssa or Chandra at this point.
Yeah.
Just leave them alone. Or bring back their relationship like you should have in the past.
Right.
Like it was.
Yeah.
Because in my opinion, I never even thought that Chandra and Nyssa's relationship was that fleshed out anyway.
Oh,
I wasn't sitting there saying, what the fuck did they do? I was sitting there going, oh, what? And then when it was that like ridiculous, the actual words of, well, Chandra likes strapping men or whatever, and I'm just like, what?
Decidedly male types or whatever it was.
I almost gagged.
Yeah.
But anyway, let's not even...
No, that's fine.
Ugh.
So, any opinions that anybody has on anything, but especially this topic is one that I think many people in the community are passionate about. As always, let us know in the comments. Did you like this? Did you dislike it? Did you even notice it? Were you even aware that little hint of a line was in there? Let us know. That's what the comments are for. We would love to hear from you. So another thing I wanted to talk about, and in fact is another complaint, and is a complaint similar to something that we talked about 2 weeks ago. The final Innistrad Midnight Hunt story had a picture of Secrets of the Key, which was the story spotlight card. In this story, there's a picture of Fateful Absence. So if you go watch the video from 2 weeks ago, my complaint is that the Secrets of the Key art is in no way similar to the story beat that it's depicting.
Right.
Teferi's not there. Arlen's not just casually standing there. She's very injured, almost dead. And now in this story, we have Fateful Absence, which shows the moment that Soren discovers that Edgar's gone. And in the art, it's Soren looking very angry, like kind of leaning forward very angrily, and there's an open coffin next to him that is empty. But in the story, when Soren finds that Edgar's missing, he finds that Edgar's missing because the room is devoid of anything.
Right.
Especially the coffin. So I get that, like, it's like symbolic, I guess, except that it's not, because he's blatantly standing there with a coffin that's not actually there. Like, I get that it would be very difficult to depict a missing coffin without getting, like, cartoony with it, right? Like in cartoons, if there's something missing,
like
there's
a
like
chalk outline.
Yeah, there's like the white like dotted line, and it like blinks there. So like I get it, you can't have a piece of art that looks like that, but at the same time, like you're just lying now. Like it's the second time in 2 sets, right? So we've moved away from.
You could have like a sunlight fade that's in the shape of the room other than a coffin.
Yeah,
you know,
and
like an outline of a coffin that didn't get faded by the sun.
Yeah, or like a dust outline, although even though this story specifically mentions that this area of the castle doesn't have dust in it, but still, that would probably be better as well. You know, and something in the flavor text, like Soren could have sworn that there was a coffin here with his grandfather in it, you know?
Yeah.
It would be kind of, so that even if like the outline of a coffin in dust on the floor didn't like read at first glance like that, the flavor text would absolutely explain it for you. And the fact that it's a story spotlight like would help you to understand it a little bit better. But instead it's just not there. It's just the coffin's there in the art and it's not there in the story. And it's just like, why? Why is that okay? It's so opposite from what makes sense. Like, I don't know. Maybe story spotlight cards should be ones that should be delayed until the story is written. Maybe the stories should be written sooner than they are, so that the art department and the art directors can get together and appropriately give art descriptions for the story spotlight arts.
Or the people who do the arts get to read the story before anyone else.
Sure.
So that it helps them interpret the art direction that they've been given.
I'm just saying, I always work off of the assumption that the stories have not been done by the time the art descriptions go out and the first drafts, second drafts, final drafts of art come in. That's my assumption. I have no knowledge of that whatsoever, but that's just how it feels to me. It feels like the stories could be done so quickly in comparison, right? Taking nothing away from the author's skill compared to the artist's skills by any means. But I feel like the stories could be done so much later than the art could, because rewrites are a lot easier than redraws, even with like digital art, where you could kind of work with different layers or whatever, and so you could just fix a certain layer. That still, I feel like, is a lot more work than highlighting a paragraph and changing it, like retyping something,
like,
you know?
Taking out the fact that the coffin wasn't there.
Sure. So, I don't know, that was something that
But obviously it was important to have the coffin with Edgar at the wedding.
Yes.
Later, right? So I understand why they, like, retconned themselves, kind of, in, like, writing it into the story, despite the fact that the art already, like, didn't coincide with that.
Sure. Well, that's actually another interesting question is, does the story team and or the authors, did they get to know what the art descriptions are?
Right.
So did they purposefully, knowing that Fateful Absence had the art there, had the coffin there in the art, did they know when they were writing the story that the coffin was gone? Or sorry, was there, and then chose to have the coffin be gone? Or do both sides just never speak? Just ever talk to each other at all? Like there's like a vague like, oh, this occurs, so okay, we'll make art of it. It just baffles my mind. That's twice now, right? We've moved away from numerical story spotlight cards, but the whole reason that story spotlight cards exist in the first place is because there was a time where people didn't understand, if only looking at the arts or the cards, what the story was, that there were big story beats left out by not reading the story, only by looking at the cards. So they made sure to have story spotlight cards so that you could put a spotlight on the big moments in the story. Anyway, it just, especially because the art is there, and then 3 paragraphs down, it's like 5 lines down, it says that the coffin's gone. It's like, no, it's not. You could literally, on the computer, have it on the same screen at the same time. The picture of the coffin at the top and the description that the coffin's missing on the bottom of the same screen.
If your screen's big enough, I guess. But yeah, maybe some people are reading it on their phones, so they can't do that.
Regardless. It's very frustrating. And then the last thing, I was talking to Amy about this before we got on camera. I was very interested with Soren's characterization here. But I'm also fully aware, especially based on what you were saying earlier, that maybe I've just drank the Kool-Aid at this point, and I'm just okay with it. Because I said to myself, when I was reading this, I was like, oh, so this is the direction that they're going with Soren now. Like, this is what the new Soren is, right? So I wasn't upset anymore about, like, but this doesn't seem like Soren. It was just like, yeah, of course it doesn't seem like Soren, because it's the new story team, so they're going to make everything their own by doing whatever the hell they want, and we're not going to get continuing characterization anymore. It's just going to be kind of whatever direction they want to go, And so, to me, I was somewhat intrigued by what we saw from Soren, at least in that, and then I'll let you kind of take your time.
I mean, I don't really know if you want me to speak to that, because I'm just super fucking annoyed with it.
So then that's fair enough.
Like, at no point in this story did I feel that the writer of this story had an idea of who these characters were.
It was like, I was saying to Amy, I wonder what supplementary material was given to review prior to Midnight Hunt or Crimson Vow.
And you know what? We can say that all we want, but at this point, I'm done. I'm done saying it.
So
stop using the same characters if you're not going to do them any justice. Stop it, just write new characters then. Like, if you really don't care about who these characters are, to the point where each new author is going to
interpret them differently or
do poor characterization of them, then just stick to each new author writes new characters. The end. I mean, will that be mondoli shitty? Yes, it will. But I feel like it can't be worse than this. Not that this story is bad, and not that the author is bad, because I think that this author is great. The problem is just, there's no continuity with who Kaya is, with who Chandra is, from, the last time we saw them to now. Mm-hmm. Or from 2 times ago we saw them to now. From 2 times ago to now, it's changed twice with each of these characters, I feel like. So it's really just so sad to come back to these characters every single time and know that the new person who's writing about them doesn't know them.
Like I said,
that's my take on it.
That's fair. Like I said, I feel like I drank the Kool-Aid a bit, because what I really appreciated about what was done with Soren here was that there's so many contradictory feelings and emotions in him at any one time. He's thinking about protecting Innistrad from Olivia. He's thinking about going and talking to his grandfather, because his grandfather has to see reason now with Eternal Night. He has to. With the fact that these humans are going to die out, and then the vampires are going to starve to death. They're not going to have anything else to feed off of. So Edgar must understand. But then also he's thinking to himself, is it even worth it, right? Do I even care? And so he's so conflicted with both sides. So he's depressed, he's angry, he's ready for action, he wants to sit around and do nothing. Like, they're all clashing against each other, and I feel like they were all mentioned within 3 paragraphs. Mm-hmm. And I think that there's a part of me that was like, this is confusing. And it's like, of course it's confusing. He is confused because he is unsure of what to do right now. Mm-hmm. How does he handle this situation? He is an old walker. We talked about this a bit with Innistrad Midnight Hunt with Teferi and interacting with Ren and Seven. He's an old walker. So to him, everything was very simple in the past. I'm going to do whatever the hell I want because I'm basically a god.
Right.
And it doesn't matter what anyone else has to say. And on top of being a god, I mean, he's from a family of immortals. His grandfather's not a planeswalker, and yet is older than he.
Right.
Right? And have been around for centuries, millennia, in fact. Because I think even in this story, he said it took 3 millennia for him to realize that it wasn't working or something like that.
I thought it was 5, but
something
either
like
way, I mean, that's so much time.
It's a very long period of time.
And it's more time than I would ever want to deal with this nonsense.
But that's a really clear indication to me. Like, it just shows how many contradictions are in Soren's mind, right? He knows what it used to feel like to be an old walker and what he used to be able to do. Now he feels what he can do now. He's lost Avacyn, who was his own creation, who he created to save the plane. She's gone, so he's depressed about that, but he needs to still try to save the plane because he still sees that there's a problem, and with that old walker mentality, probably feels that he's the only one equipped to do it, and yet doesn't want to leave his house because he's just so depressed of Avacyn dying, or having that he himself had to be the one to unmake his great creation in Avacyn. So he's just still depressed. It's just, I found that so interesting, and I hope that that continues throughout these stories, that you still see all of that kind of conflict, that I think they said he like licked his wounds, right, when he was waiting, following being put in the wall. And then he fought Nahiri, and Nahiri destroyed his home because she just worked with all the stone and just destroyed it all. So now his childhood home, his manor, right, that his ancestors lived in, is destroyed. He goes down and sees all the coffins of his ancestors, perfectly untouched, perfectly undisturbed, and he's jealous, but also furious.
Yeah.
He's jealous that he can't sleep in that coffin. He's furious that they went to sleep when he stayed to try to keep the place safe. He's so conflicted. So I really, really liked that. And again, fully aware of the fact that it's like, oh, okay, this is the newer Soren. This is what we're dealing with Soren, that they're trying to make him seemingly more likable or more relatable, in that the dude is just struggling. He just wants to keep his home safe, even with backwards ass thinking of like, well, we need to keep killing humans, but not that quickly, right? We need to keep bleeding them dry so that we can feed, but we can't have all of the food die out.
Yeah, I mean, I think what sucks here in this situation is that it's hard to not think that the right answer is just to let it play out. You know, just be okay with the fact that you're letting people die.
Right.
Because that's the only way that the vampire population will also die out.
Right. I guess it's just that I think Soren's aware, even with werewolves and geists and zombies, etc., I don't know what would happen to the plane of Innistrad if every human was dead. Right? Like, maybe there would be like small pockets of resistance fighters or something like that. But that, like, to have the entire human population wiped out and or converted to, you know, a lycanthrope or a vampire or whatever the case may be, as we discussed earlier, I don't think Innistrad would endure as this story talked about.
And that's my point. Like, he's been around for so long, and his grandfather's been around for even longer. His grandfather made this mess, and he made it so long ago. And Soren is a hamster in a wheel trying to clean up this mess. It only makes sense that at some point he would just have to give up and realize that the only way to prove to all of these vampires that, no, you don't get to do whatever the fuck you want, is by letting it play out and letting them kill themselves off by killing off their food sources. The problem is that killing off their food sources, it means murder. And he just has too much of a conscience for that, I guess.
Well, and it's like, they won't come back as well, right? So It's not like you kill off their food source, they learn their lesson, and then they, are able to live in harmony and balance again. Yeah. No, they, like you said, then they all get wiped out. Arguably including him, although he has the unique distinction of being able to go to another plane, feed, and then come back, I guess.
Yeah, but at that point, what would make it worth coming back?
True.
As well?
True.
I mean...
I agree.
And you talked about his childhood home and where his ancestors lived as well. And it's like, Yeah, but how much of that experience is positive for him and how much of it is negative?
This story talked about that. Yeah, absolutely. It gave me very serious Black vibes, right? Just the idea that, like, this is a home that was left to him, or that the legacy dictates that it would be his home, and yet, ironically, he was never welcome in it when it was populated.
Right.
And now that it's devoid, he's using it kind of begrudgingly. And or, I mean, there's a bit of pride there, right? He talks about the books in the library, and he's like, well, we wouldn't have anything but the best because it's Markov Manor. But at the same time, he's walking around being like, I was never really welcome here. And it's like, you're kind of talking out of both sides of your mouth, but weirdly...
But that's the experience.
I was going to say, weirdly, some people have complicated relationships with their families. It sucks.
Well, but my point is kind of that it's not your responsibility as an individual to fix the messes that your family made.
Correct. I mean,
and so I understand the ramifications of that are horrific, right? But how many millennia is he going to do this to himself?
Well, and again, we talked about the conflict, right? You're right. He doesn't have to fix his family's mistakes, but he has tasked himself with being the protector of Innistrad. And in order to protect Innistrad, he kind of has to fix his family's mistakes.
He tasked himself with fixing his family's mistakes. What I'm saying is, that's not really up to him.
Sure, I don't know. I guess I look at it as similar to Nyssa, right? Maybe slightly different, but Nyssa loves Zendikar. Now, why does she love Zendikar? Well, because of her connection to the ley lines and to nature and to etc. But Soren still loves Innistrad.
I understand, but Nissa's the one who messed up on Zendikar. So Nyssa then felt a responsibility to fix it. Soren didn't mess up Innistrad. Soren messed up Zendikar, but he didn't mess up Innistrad. So
that's funny.
Like
that's funny.
And if he had cared less about fixing somebody else's mess on Innistrad, maybe he wouldn't have messed up Zendikar. So maybe that's easy for me to say as someone who loves Zendikar more than Innistrad, and maybe it's hard for someone else who loves Innistrad more and Zendikar less to agree with me, but that's how I feel.
Well,
is that, like...
But also don't forget, around the time of the Travails, right, arguably, and we don't really know how he feels, because I don't think he said it in this story, or since the story where it occurred, but arguably, because of him, Innistrad got so messed up in the first place. Avacyn only had to be unmade because she was corrupted by Emrakul, who was only there because of Nahiri, who was only there because of Soren. So it's Soren's fault that he had to unmake Avacyn, right? So he should still, or would likely still feel an obligation to correct the problem that Avacyn was created to correct.
Okay.
Because now Avacyn's gone, but it's because of his own failings. And he even says in this story, called her his failed mentee or something like that, like his failed protege, I think is the word that he used for Nahiri. Mm-hmm. That Nahiri was his failed protege. So he feels that he failed with her, and that's what led her to attack him and Innistrad in the way that she did. So maybe he feels guilty.
Originally, Soren sucks. Okay.
I feel like that's never not been how you felt. Like,
correct.
You just said originally as if like that changed.
Because with this story, I slightly didn't feel that way.
I'm telling you, I really liked this. I liked seeing the conflict in him, seeing the contradictions that he was going through in his head. It was fascinating to me. It really was. So
it wasn't fascinating to me. It just felt like bad characterization.
But I hope that they go forward with it. If you're going to do it, double the hell down, right? That's how I feel. If you're going to take it away so drastically, then take it away. Don't try to backtrack it later. Don't try to anything else. If this is the direction that you're going, go full bore in that direction. We can talk more in future episodes and or its own episode or its own project. We can talk more about that whole concept of changing story teams, changing authors. Should it and how does it change the characters? We can talk about that some other time. If you have thoughts about that, you're welcome to leave it in any video. Excuse me.
You okay?
Yeah, I think so. You're welcome to leave it in the comments of any video at all, especially this one because this is the one that we're talking about it. But yeah, that's kind of all I had for this particular story.
All right.
Again, thought it was cool. Don't forget, next week we will be back with side story number 1. We're going to be reviewing them in the order that they released, or I guess at this point in A, B, A, B, A, B order. So main story, side story, etc. until it's done. And then when it's done, we will see if the new stories are up, or if they're not, maybe we'll go back to our Battle for Zendikar Oath of the Gatewatch reviews. Whatever the case may be, definitely stay tuned to this channel as I mentioned earlier. Please don't forget to subscribe and ring that bell. You will get notified for these videos, for our openings, for our live streams. We have other channels linked down in the description box below as well. So definitely check those out. That's Video Games for All and Gluten Free for All. So we appreciate you checking those out. And yeah, that's going to be the end of this particular video. Thank you all so very much for watching. Please don't forget that if you want to talk about characterization, if you want to talk about new story team, old story team, new character, old character, do you think that there is proper characterization and that Soren is the same? Let us know, because you doing that is a great way for all of you to join the two of us in showing off our...
#Vorthos Pride.
That's right. Thank you so much for being here. We really, really appreciate it. Please don't forget to do other cool YouTube stuff like liking and sharing. That's super helpful. We really, if you believe in the work that we're doing, please pass it along. We really appreciate it. So, for now, from us here at the Geek for All family of channels, I have been Joe.
And I'm Amy.
And as we always say, in whichever video of ours you watch next, we will see you all next time. Thanks, everybody.